When I was 14 years old, my family and I went on a boating trip out of Melbourne's western Port Bay. I remember being at the helm with my father, steering the little boat over the waves, and then the next thing we knew, my big brother was shouting that water was coming in. And it all happened so fast. Mom and Dad were shouting for us to stay together, and then suddenly, the boat tipped over, and we were in the water. We later found out that the bottom of our boat had been almost completely rotten, and that its owners had been extremely and willfully negligent in renting it to us, and we had no choice but to start swimming. Since it was late in the evening, no one had seen us go down, so it was up to us to rescue ourselves. I was a reasonably good swimmer, and we all had life jackets on, but it was still around 2 miles back to shore, so land looked like it was a long, long way away. Darkness fell as we were swimming, but my dad started to struggle and my big brother swam back to try and help him. My mom and I stuck together and kept going, but we soon lost sight of my father and brother. Seagulls cried out above me, and I kept imagining that they were warning me of an attack from sharks that were no doubt swimming in the waters around us. I could see land, but it didn't seem to get any closer. Finally, after more than 3 hours in that water, I felt the sandy bottom against my feet. I'd reached the mud flats of what I believed was the mainland, but my mom, dad, and brother were nowhere to be seen. I was weak, cold, and exhausted. I dragged myself through the mud, which at some points was almost up to my waist, and this was even more terrifying than the swimming. The mud kept on sucking me down, and I was terrified that I'd sink and be suffocated. My muscles ached, my lungs burned, and I felt like I was about to pass out at points. But at the same time, I knew the clock was ticking, that it was essentially down to me and me alone to get help from my family. The clock was ticking in my head, and I needed to get my family the help they badly needed. When I finally made it ashore, I realized that I was on French Island, an island with an old, disused prison on it that has only about 50 people on it. I ran through the bushland, using up the last reserves of my energy, it felt like, and feeling thorns scratching against my legs and arms. I ran for a long time, too, stopping every so often to catch my breath before continuing through the bush. Finally, I found a house, and after banging on the door, someone opened it and I told them what had happened. I just remember crying and crying as they tried to comfort me, and how I begged them to help find my family. They told me everything was going to be okay, and that they'd contacted the Victoria Coast Guard. I appreciate that they were just trying to console me, but I knew they were wrong. The next morning, the bodies of my mom, dad, and older brother were recovered from the water off the coast of Fairhaven, and words can't express how devastated I was, and I was filled with this overwhelming survivor's guilt, thinking that I should be the one dead. And for 5 long years, I was a wreck, and I think I might be dead from drink and drugs if it wasn't for the birth of my first kid. And for a long, long time, I avoided any kind of large body of water, which included swimming pools, before my therapist suggested that I undertake some exposure therapy. This would involve brief trips to a local pool, but at first, my anxiety was so bad that even if my head was above the water, I just couldn't breathe. I tried for 4 months, but nothing worked until a local swim coach heard my story and offered some help. And then over the next year or so, the therapy started to chip away at my fear until, finally, I was able to look at the sea without feeling like I was about to have a panic attack. My proudest moment has been taking part in a charity swim across the Rip, which is an infamously rough stretch of water. We helped raise money for a domestic violence charity here in Australia, which is a cause very close to my heart for reasons that could well make for another true scary story. It might have taken me 20 years, but I no longer let my fear control me. I now understand that what happened wasn't my fault, but the irony of needing water to heal the very trauma that it created has never been lost on me.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. That day, I was working on research about an important topic and I needed to conduct field work to collect some specimens underwater. I also needed to gather data on a strange-looking fossil we found underwater a few days ago. Furthermore, I wanted to check if there were more evidence connected to it. There was a huge possibility that it could be a new species if I could only find proof, so diving under the sea was imperative. My team included 5 other marine biologists other than me, so it would be okay to leave the observation of other organisms to study their behaviors and interactions. If you're thinking we only focus on one project at a time and leave all the others while doing it, then you're wrong. There might be some who may prefer focusing on only one task at a time, but not all of us. So while I handled one of the topics that I was sure would be able to maneuver on my own, still, I asked Christian to come with me in case I needed some backup. Looking at how the lab wasn't far from the sea, it didn't take much time for us to drive there. Once we were there, we switched into our diving gear, and after checking that everything was in order, we plunged into the water and started moving forward. Even though I was leading this research, Christian had a pretty good insight about it, and that was the very reason why I chose him to be there with me. Well, there was another reason behind that. I had a teeny tiny crush on him and was hoping for things to escalate a bit further than work. Since I'm a big workaholic, I didn't when things started to get darker. I hint that the day has fallen and the duskiness of the night started to replace it, but I was too busy collecting the specimen that I didn't even care, and as I was scanning the area of my eyes went to an exceptionally old-looking ship. By the looks of it, it was untouched, which was weird looking at how our divers come here so often and still hadn't reported sightings of it. To put my curious mind at ease, I went ahead to traverse the ship and started exploring. Before I was about to dive deeper, I informed Christian that I would be exploring further for a bit longer, and that if he wanted to take off with the samples, he could, since it was getting late. I know most of you might know this, but for those who don't, we use hand signals while diving. For marine biologists like me and Christian who are experts in diving and looking at how we need to be underwater almost every week, we have learned complete sign language and can easily commune with each other. Anyway, so as I was looking around the broken old ship, I could sense a strange aura around it. Trust me, I've seen a few things underwater, but nothing had given off such an ominous vibe. I looked around the outer area at first. Nothing much to see there, so I moved toward the engine room. And that moment, I opened 2 human skeletons were found there, which still gave me jump scares even after seeing so many of them. I mean, come on, who wouldn't freak out from 2 human skeletons found in an underwater ship at night? I didn't want to go further inside as the ship was already giving me a hair-raising feeling, but as I was about to leave, I noticed a room that seemed to be locked from the outside. My curiosity got the best of me yet again, so I went there, and the moment I put my left hand on the palm, it fell. Out of curiosity, I walked inside, only to see the most disturbing, nightmarish scene. At least 100 skeletons were inside, all of them wearing clothes that had almost melted away at this point. It looked like someone had locked all these people inside on purpose and left them to die. My heart started to beat uncontrollably, and I couldn't watch the macabre scene any longer. The eerie feeling that had surrounded this ship only grew stronger by the minute. I immediately went out of the room and started to swim upwards to get away from the horror, but as I was to exit the perimeter of the ship, a mysterious yet terrifying force stopped me from getting out. For some reason, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get out of there. It was as if there was an invisible wall surrounding the ship. I could see Christian waiting for me at a distance, looking worried, but he wasn't looking in my direction. So I tried to use my transceiver to try and tell him that I was stuck there, but for some reason, probably something to do with the ghostly ship, it wasn't working. I tried swimming around it in an attempt to find a way to escape it, but it was no use. Whatever was blocking me had surrounded the ship from everywhere. As I continued with my struggle to get out of there and kept failing, my optimism started to fade. And just when I was about to lose all my hope, a weird hankering took over my mind, and I started to swing against the barrier. Finally, I was able to get through, and as I did, Christian's eyes met mine, and I could feel him taking a sigh of relief. He asked me through the hand signs where I was for this long, and I turned around to point toward the ship. it wasn't there. Mistaking my freeze for me not wanting to tell him, Christian grabbed my hand and started to swim toward the surface. But as we were proceeding, we felt a down current coming from the same direction where the ship was. It was almost as if whatever it was didn't want us to leave alive. Thank God that we weren't caught in it, because even though we knew techniques to get out of currents, I wasn't sure if we could escape from this one. Once we got out of the water, Christian turned to me and asked where I disappeared to in the middle of the dive. "What do you mean where? Didn't you see me go to that ship with your own eyes?" I asked, raising an eyebrow, even though I had a hunch about the reality. I just wanted to confirm it through him. A ship? There was no ship there. All I saw was you diving deeper before you disappeared and then reappeared after about an hour. Do you have any idea how worried I was? My ears gave out after listening to this. I could tell he was giving me more scolding. I just stood there looking at the sea with a shiver going down my entire body before I passed out. I woke up in the nursing room that was located right beside our lab, and I had a high fever for a few days before I came back to the lab for work again. No, I don't have a nightmare about that or any trauma with water. I'm working just fine since I wasn't harmed in that incident. But still, I was terrified about going diving alone, especially at night for a few days. I wondered for quite some time about what might have transpired at that ship. Was it intentionally sunk, as if there was obvious signs of a planned massacre to become haunted? I didn't have any answers in my mind though. The good thing about all this is that I have stopped being reckless and going off my own to explore the sea. Instead, whenever I'm on a project, I take my entire team with me to avoid any further confrontation with ghostly things. And by the way, nothing's happened between me and that little crush of mine yet.
Deep water. We were not meant to be together, being forced into a marriage that was not supposed to happen. I was waiting for one of the families from New York. I was an accountant, and I used to look at books of all the businesses that the Giovannis had. Now, if you don't know who the Giovanni is, let me tell you in a sentence. It is a family that you don't ever want to be associated with. My uncle moved from Italy to America, and in America, he found a friend in Roberto Giovanni, who just like my uncle, migrated from Italy to America. Giovanni's owned everything. The local shops, restaurants, politicians, the police. My uncle introduced me to Roberto Giovanni when I graduated from college. I wanted to work with the presidential candidates on his campaign. But then my uncle said, "Look, you can either work with the pricks, these politicians, or you can work for someone who puts them in his pocket and owns them." I wanted something better. So I went with my uncle and met Roberto. He was tall and built-up Italian. He patted my shoulders and with probably a Cuban cigar in his mouth said, "So this is the guy you've been talking about, Romano?" And my uncle replied, "Yes, Roberto. He's a good kid. Good with numbers. He knows stuff." And with his hands gesturing even more, "You know stuff, papers, laws, you know," Roberto replied. "All right, Romano. Take him to the business room. Explain to him what we do and what we want to do with our money." Then he gestured to me and came closer and said, "Also, hey kid, come over here." He took a bunch of $100 bills in his hand and said, "Buy a suit, all right? Romano will take you to the shop and buy something that stands out. If you're gonna manage business and numbers, you gotta act the part." That was the first day that I started working for Roberto Giovanni. After a few months of working for Roberto Giovanni, I had information on how much of the business and what all the other businesses did Giovanni hold in the list of all the politicians and cops that he had in his pockets. I became the main man of the operation and kept all the numbers in every detail. We were more like a family than a workplace. Roberta had a wife and 2 daughters, Talia and Rafina. Rafina was supposedly the wild one, and the one who could hold a grudge. She once got one of her lovers beaten up real bad because she saw her talking with some other girl. Don't even ask me what happened to the girl. She was batshit crazy, and I stayed the hell away from her. Talia, on the other hand, was quiet and probably was born in the wrong family. As years passed on, I had a strong hold on every information I had on the Giovannis, and now Roberto trusted me with everything. October 12th. It was a Monday morning, and it was raining as it has never. The streets were flooded with the overflowing sewers, and nothing but scum skimmed over those streets. I ran towards the house, and outside it was Roberto, drenched in rain, waiting for me as if his life depended on it. "Hurry, kid, I've been waiting for you. Where the hell have you been?" I replied, "The roads are blocked with scum water." And he held me by my shoulder and brought me closer. "Hey, kid, you're a wonderful kid, all right? And you will help me do these papers so much better. Now I am saying this because I like you like my own son, and I want you to know that the next thing that comes out of your mouth will decide your future." I looked at him, confused and clueless, and then he said, "I'm going to marry you to my daughter. Now I really would have liked you to marry Talia, but it's Rafina who you gonna be with. Don't ask me why I'm doing it. Just remember, with one yes, you'll be taking over everything." He married Rafina because he was scared that she might actually end up screwing the whole family over. Now I was the family, so all the business was open to me, and I was taking care of everything while Rafina was being a reckless woman, spending everything, and making it impossible for all of us. Our marriage was good. We barely fought, probably because we didn't care enough about each other or the marriage. So the primary years of our marriage went on to understand each other, but there was none. Soon, the petty quarrels of the married life started, and Rafina always made sure who her father was. There was no way I could have won any arguments. She would always bring up her father and threaten me. I didn't care much about them because I knew Roberto wouldn't care. But one day, when me and Uncle Romano were out doing a business, Rafina went to her father and complained that I hit her, even though I didn't and I was out of town. I came back and Roberto called me in. "Hey kid, come in. How's everything? You feeling good? Rafina treating you good?" I chuckled and I said, "Yeah, she can be a handful sometimes." Roberto looked at me and said, "Now Rafina came to me and said you slapped her." I objected in between, and he injected and continued, "Wait, I know you didn't. You were out doing a job I sent you to. I know it. But the thing is, my daughter, she's got the habit of having everything, and now it's too late to correct it. I just want you to know, I don't have any hard feelings for you. I love you, and you're my son, all right? Stop calling me Mr. Giovanni, and call me Dad like Rafia does, okay?" Completely confused by this conversation, I started heading back to my home, and I was pretty tired from the trip, when suddenly, one of the goons of Roberto roughed me up. And now the conversation made sense. I went back home with a broken nose and saw Rafina smiling. I looked at her and said, "Glad my broken nose made you smile." I woke up angry. I was pissed about the whole incident, and the incident triggered something in me. There was this sudden desire for revenge that I had. I went to see Roberto the first morning. I went and he welcomed me and asked me while laughing, "What happened to your nose? You're an alright kid. I'm sorry. I got to make my daughter happy too. And also, I got you both tickets for Italy. You live in 3 days." And that was it. That was my limit. I was done being controlled by a scum of a family. So I decided to take my revenge on them. I had 3 days to arrange everything, and so I packed up all the papers and all the documents. It was all a strong evidence against the family, and I gathered them all and went to the feds. I knew which one to go to. Every cop and politician was under the payroll. I had them on my list. This was a very big catch for the feds, and I did not want any part of it. So I told the feds what I wanted to do. 3 days later, I and Rafina were on a boat in Sardinia, Italy. We were getting ready to head to the sea to watch the dolphins. As soon as we entered the deep waters, we could see the dolphins emerging, and I saw her eyes sparkling. For a minute, I looked at her, and there was this rare innocence in her. But I was definite about my goal. I took out my phone and called her father, and gave the phone to her. She refused, but then I said, "This could be the last time you talk to him." She snatched the phone from my hand, all confused, and turns out it was the last time that she talked to him, in the middle of the sea, in the deep waters. She found out that her dad was shot by the feds. They wanted to bring him in, but he wasn't ready to give up. She was devastated and came in close and hugged me. I stood there for a second, and then she asked me, "Who would do such a thing?" As she was crying and holding me, I stepped back and broke the hug. I looked at her and smiled. It was me. I made it possible. I almost kind of knew the old man would panic, but really, the feds? He thought he could outrun the feds. He was way over in his hand. Well, God rest his soul in hell. She was furious, and as she tried to charge on me, the two men in the boat held her. I hired the men to make sure that she doesn't act the way she is. She looked at me. "Why would you do it? You're a murderer." I looked back at her and I chuckled. I did not murder him. He was killed because of his actions. He was a piece of shit. Do you know how many people has he killed or got killed? Because I know. I have their names. So, good riddance. Now her tears were all settled. So she looked at me and asked, "Who helped you?" And I looked at her excitingly and said, "Wouldn't you like to know?" And then I told the men to tie her up, and they did exactly what I said. They tied her up, and she was sitting down on the corner of the boat. Soon, another boat came in, and we all boarded the other boat. She was still sitting in the corner with her hands tied, and the boat was empty. It was just her, in the middle of the sea, in the deep waters. Now, I could have just killed her, but I wanted her to suffer. The boat had a bottle of water and supply that would last her 2 days. Now I gave her a choice, to come back with me and live like normal people doing normal things. Or she can act like the tough gangster daughter she is and try to make out of the place on her own. She was stubborn, so she chose to stay back on the boat on her own. So in a way, I did not kill her. She probably did it herself. I came back a week later and took care of all the legit business Roberto had and married Talia. And for the next few years, enjoyed my life to its full extent. It has been 6 years since that incident, and today, I received a letter in my mailbox, a postcard from Sardinia that said, "Hey, husband,